Okay, this is our daily study of Pirkei Avot, the Mishnah Ethics of the Fathers, for those who have yard site for tonight, the 28th of Sivan for Shabbos. Saeed Adamus, Esther Cheplov, Mendel Dubinsky, Beatrice Iceberg, Anna Kaufman, Sylvia Levinson, Howard Levitan, Rose Raisin, and Herda Rushin. May their memory be for a blessing. A link to the text of the Mishnah will be in the first comment below. We are up to chapter 4, Mishnah number 4. And that Mishnah says, Rabbi Levitas ish Yavna Omer, Me'od me'od havishval ruach shetikvas enosh rima. Rabbi Levitas of Yavna said, be exceedingly humble, for the hope of man is but the worm. So he says, be exceedingly humble, and the Kahati points out this is actually the only statement we have in the entire corpus of the Mishnah quoting this Rabbi Levitas. He doesn't say anything else in the Mishnah. Not just in Pirkei Avot, but in all of Mishnayot. So there's a sort of irony here that he's living up to what he's saying, be exceedingly humble, and he was very quiet and humble. That's all he had to say in life, apparently. Or that's all that was ended up recording in the Mishnah for posterity. And the reason he gives is the hope of man is worms, meaning, hey, you're all going to the grave anyway, where your body will be devoured by worms, so let that keep you humble. Okay. He says, ma'od, ma'od, very, very humble. These two qualifiers. Now, Maimonides takes this, and we had in last week's Torah portion, what made Moses so great? Ish Moshe anav ma'od mikol ha'adam. And the man Moses was the most humble man in the entire world. His brother and sister, Aaron and Miriam, had criticized him, and the Torah records that he did not really take it personally. The greatest person in the world, Moses, who ever lived, was also the most humble person who ever lived, and that's a very Jewish value. And Maimonides generally borrows from the Greek philosopher Aristotle the idea of the middle path, the golden mean, that a person should always be exactly in between two extremes of character traits. So, for example, don't be a workaholic and also don't be lazy. Just kind of common wisdom, find some happy medium in between. When it comes to giving tzedakah, giving charity, don't be foolish and give all your money away, but don't be a miser and give nothing. Let's go to a character trait. When it comes to simcha, to joy, Maimonides would say, don't be just joyous and happy and smiling all the time, because that's kind of foolish and not real, but also, of course, don't be sad. Try to find some sort of middle ground of being appropriately happy when appropriate. Now, there are always those who will disagree. So Rabbi Nachman of Breslov said, mitzvah gedola lios b'simcha tamid. And the Hasidim stress this more. No, it's a great mitzvah to always be joyous all the time. But Maimonides generally found you have to find a middle path. But he actually has two exceptions. One of them is anger. Maimonides says there's no place for any anger. And that's also debatable. Other rabbis say, no, you can't just suppress your anger. That's not natural. And perhaps a place for anger is righteous anger. Something outrageous happens. There's a moral outrage, and that's the proper place to stand up and say, this issue happening in society is unjust, and there's a place for anger in that sense, which I tend to agree with. But Maimonides says anger is an exception. There's no person should not have any anger in their heart at all. And based on this Mishnah, he also says the same thing about arrogance. He says there is no place for arrogance at all, because we see Rabbi Levitas says, be exceedingly humble, of lowly and meek spirit. And there are those who would disagree with that too and say, well, there is a place, you have to have self-esteem, right? So where's the balance? But it's just interesting that Maimonides, who believes in the middle path, sees anger and arrogance as two exceptions where you have to go to the extreme. Okay. Then the next statement in this Mishnah, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer Kol HaMachal Shem Shemayim Baseser Nifroim Mimenu Bagoloi Echad Shogeg ve'echad Mezid B'chil Hashem. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka said, he who desecrates the name of heaven in secret is punished for it openly, no matter whether he desecrated the name unwittingly or willfully. So Chil Hashem, so that means desecrating God's name. So for example, if you're a religious Jew, a religious Jewish man, let's say, and you wear a yarmulke and everyone knows you're religious, and then you do something terrible. So not only you rob a bank, let's say, so not only have you done you violated thou shalt not steal, you've also violated Chil Hashem, desecrating God's name, because you're supposed to represent God. You claim to represent God, and you embarrass God and his people. So if you try to desecrate God's name in secret, it will be exposed in public. And this is one of those statements where I say, well, is that really how the world works? Is that always how it works? It's possible that this Mishnah is meant to apply to the exceedingly righteous, who are held to a higher standard. And I say that based on the Kahati, whose proof text is from King David. King David basically stole another man's wife, Bathsheba. He saw her bathing on the roof, and he said, "I have to have that woman." And the Talmud gives justification for why perhaps it wasn't really adultery, but the plain meaning of the text is it really was. And the prophet Nathan rebukes him and says, "You did a terrible thing, and you desecrated God's name because you're supposed to be His anointed king. And so you thought you'd do this in secret, but it shall be exposed before everyone under the sun. For you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before Israel and before the sun." So perhaps people on the level of King David, that's who this is meant to apply to. And even if you desecrate God's name by accident, that's how important desecrating God's name is. What's an example of desecrating God's name by accident? Another example that I can infer based on one of the examples Kahati gives is the different rabbis who say, so there's a rabbi who just goes by the name Rav, which means rabbi, and he says if he purchases meat in the butcher shop and doesn't pay on time, that's a desecration of God's name because he's a rabbi, he's an important person, and he's late in his payment. And that's the kind of thing that could happen by accident. You just forgot to pay. You didn't intend not to pay. But that's a desecration of God's name that you did by accident, but God will expose it in public. And the shopkeeper might tell you, in front of other people, "Hey, you didn't pay me yet." So you have to be it's a lesson, a lot of Pirkei Avot is directed specifically at rabbis and leaders. You have to be incredibly careful about representing God and Judaism properly. And with that, on Erev Shabbos, for the Artzites of Shabbos, we don't say the El Male, we say the prayers following the study of Mishnah. Ana Adonai Malei Rachamim Asher B'Yadcha Nefesh Kol Chai V'Ruach Kol Basar Ish Yeno L'Ratzon L'Fanecha Toraseinu U'Tfilaseinu Ba'avor Nishmos Kol HaAskaros Shel Halayla U'Kumol No'im Hem B'Chastra Gadol Liftoach Lehem Shari Rachamim B'Chesed V'Shari Gan Eden U'Skabel Osam Ba'avo V'Chibo U'Shlach Lehem Malachecha HaKadoshim HaTahorim Lo Licha Meloshivim Tachas Eitz HaChaim Eitzel Nishmos HaTzadikim HaTzidkanios Chasidim HaChasidos Lehenos Miziv Shchinascha L'Asbia Mituvcha Tzafim HaTzadikim והגוף ינוח בקבר במנוחה נכונה בחדווה ושמחה ושלום, כדכתיב יבוא שלום ינוחו על משכבוסם הולך נכוחו, וכתיב יעזו חסידים בכבוד ירננו על משכבוסם, וכתיב אם תשכב לו ספחת ושכבת וערבה שנsecha. And in English, please, O Hashem, full of mercy, for in your hand is the soul of all the living and the spirit of every human being. May you find favor in our Torah study and prayer. For the souls of Said Adamus, Esther Cheplov, Mendel Dubinsky, Beatrice Iceberg, Anna Kaufman, Sylvia Levinson, Howard Levitan, Rose Raisin, and Herta Rushin, in whose memory we study and pray. Accept them with love and affection and send them your holy and pure angels to lead to settle under the tree of life near the souls of the righteous and devout, to enjoy the radiance of your presence, to satiate them from your good that is concealed for the righteous. May their body repose in the grave with proper contentment, pleasure, gladness, and peace, as it is written, let him enter in peace, let them rest on their beds, everyone who has lived in his proper way. As it is written, let the devout exult in glory, let them sing joyously upon their beds. And as it is written, if you lay down, you will not fear, and you lay down, your sleep will be sweet. Amen.